My father, Patrick McBride, was born in 1902 in Derryhassan on the Roscoil Peninsula, County Donegal, Ireland. He started carrying the mail during the First World War in 1917 when he was 15 years old. He walked 35 miles a day, 6 days a week, carrying the mail. I asked him once, "How could you walk 35 miles a day, 6 days a week?" He said, "I never thought about it. I just got up, put on my uniform, and walked down to Downing's post office and picked up the mail." I knew that it rains a lot there, so I asked him, "Did you have a raincoat and an umbrella?" He said, "No, I had a cape to cover the mail." The Easter Rising in Dublin in April 1916 began. The leaders proclaimed, "Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which she receives her old tradition of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom." My father was 14 years old, and he read every newspaper about what had taken place and all that followed. The Irish War of Independence began in 1919 when my father was 17 years old. He joined the Irish Republican Army and fought for the Irish Republic while he continued to carry the mail every day. His whole family depended on his pay. The Irish Civil War started in 1922. He told me that he thought it over and went down to Downing's to tell the local commanders of the IRA that now that it was the Irish people killing other Irish people, he didn't want to be involved anymore, and they accepted his decision. His whole family depended on his pay. My father had no plans to leave home. Since he was the letter carrier, he knew everyone for many miles around, and they all knew him. He was invited to all the parties and dances and attended as many wakes and weddings as he could while carrying the mail. He loved Irish music and dancing with all his heart. One day in 1926, he received a letter from an older neighbor who had left Donegal years before, and she had married and was settled near Philadelphia. She enclosed money to pay his passage to America. Of course, he thought it over carefully. His younger brother, Manus, at 18, would be old enough to carry the mail, but should he really go? One day after work, he was having fun with his friends. He held onto the corners of his letter carrier cape and used it as a parachute to jump off high rocks onto the beach. He told me he said to himself, "I'm happy here. Why would I leave?" While he walked every day carrying the mail, he decided that after she had gone to the trouble to think of him and make and save the money she had sent to him, it would be very unmannerly of him not to accept the gift. And so he did decide to go, at least to see, and he was very excited to be going to see America. He booked his passage to New York. The British government, for their own reasons, partitioned Ireland in 1920, and the border with armed guards came into effect on the 1st of April, 1921. Because his boat, the Letitia, was leaving from the city of lovely Derry on the banks of the Foyle, now in Northern Ireland, my father hired a van and driver to travel the miles and take him through the British customs and security checks at the militarized border. That last morning, with his family, at his home in Derryhassan in February 1927, must have been very hard for all concerned. And then someone called out, The van is here. At the border, a British guard leaned in and pointed to him and asked the driver, "And who is that?" The driver answered, "A man going to America." Here, deep Sheephaven Bay in County Donegal stands in for the River Foyle in County Derry as the Letitia, with my father on board, heads out into the great Atlantic Ocean. Next stop, New York, over 3,000 miles away. On board the Letitia, my father wrote a postcard to his family. Sunday morning, 8:45 a.m. Halfways down the Foyle. I enjoyed myself last night in Derry. Goodbye, but not forever. Patty. As it happened for so many emigrants all over the world in the old days, for my father, goodbye did become goodbye forever. But as the songs say, he landed in New York and traveled on to Philadelphia. I will continue my father's story after I introduce my mother. My mother, Mary Ellen Boyce, later McBride, was born in 1907 in Minnicrosha, near Cranford, County Donegal, Ireland. Her mother was Mary Teresa Dennison, known as Mamie, the daughter of Sarah Carefoot, who was a school teacher who came from Dublin to Donegal and there married George Dennison of a local well-known land-owning family who owned, I was told, about 150 acres of land. Mamie is shown here behind her mother and alongside her two sisters, Ellen, known as Nellie, and Winifred, known as Winnie, and also her brother Manus, known as Mandy, who seems here to not want to have his picture taken. Mamie Dennison married John Boyce, known as Johnny James, because his father's name was James. Johnny James owned, I was told, about 75 acres nearby in Minnicrosha. I was told that Johnny James had a very vivid and lively personality, that he was very generous and extremely kind, but that if you disagreed with him, it was war. He was a great ghost storyteller around the fire. He told once that when he was walking home alone late at night along the road above the shore, that he turned back and he saw a woman in white going down to the rocks. Everyone knew that the woman in white was a female ghost, a spirit, a banshee. When I visited Donegal in 2023, and my three cousins on my father's side, Joe and Patty and Mickey, drove me to see the old house where my mother and all her sisters and brothers were born and raised. Perhaps I was a visiting spirit, a banshee, a ghost of my mother who was long dead. I knew for years that the old house was a ruin and that two further new houses had been built by the Boyces on the property. But the old house was the one full of my mother's life and memories. She said it was a fine house in its day, very comfortable with a slate floor and thatched roof, cool in the summer and warm in the winter. They cut and burnt turf, which I have heard so many Irish people say gave a lot of heat. A very good fire. No electricity, of course, no indoor plumbing, no piped water. You lit an oil lamp at night. You carried water in from a spout on a stream, not too far away. You didn't buy bread. You made bread. Butter? There was a churn, so you could make butter. My mother's mother worked very hard every day, year after year. They plowed fields and raised crops and kept milk cows so she could trade crops and milk for tea and sugar and so on. Her father worked very hard and had a horse and cart and traded at all the local fairs. My mother said he had a cart horse once who was was always very nervous and scared when he was being harnessed. Her father had to put his jacket over the horse's head to calm him. My mother used a phrase that I heard the great Irish hero Dan Breen and the great Irish accordion player Tony McMahon and a lot of other people all use. The same words were said to describe their early life. Money was very scarce. She remembered being so excited, running across fields with her sisters and brothers to a house where there was a dance party going on. They could hear the music while they ran, and they were so excited. My mother said her mother and father thought the world of each other and were very happily married. Her mother and father and she and all her sisters and brothers all sang. Neighbors visited and they sang and danced too. My mother remembered walking miles home from school with other children of all ages. She had been taught prayers mentioning the world without end and life everlasting. And she was very happy to tell all the other children that they were all going to live forever. She said an older boy told them all that that was not true and that we would all die one day. When my mother was 10 years old and her sister Sadie was 8 years old, they were both introduced very early to the road, with all its joys and sadness. Their mother and father had had several more children, and it was considered a great privilege to go to live with their grandparents, George and Sarah Dennison, who was also, of course, their school teacher. My mother, even when she was in her 90s, still talked about Johnny James's dog, Watch, a sheepdog, just like the one in this photo. Watch helped Johnny James with sheep herding and keeping cattle in order and anything else that he was able to do. She said that her father had about a dozen different whistles that he could give to Watch, and Watch knew exactly what each particular whistle meant, and he carried out the task with perfection. My mother remembered how when she and her brothers and sisters would walk many miles into town, Watch could judge and knew when they would be walking home, and he would run and walk the many miles out to meet them for the pleasure of walking home many more miles along with them. She said Watch would catch a rabbit or a hare for his own dinner. My mother always cried when she talked about how as Watch got older, he eventually began to lose his sight and his hearing, and he couldn't get his own dinner anymore by catching a rabbit or hare. So one day Watch caught and killed a lamb to eat, and he had to be, as they say, put down, shot dead. I asked her if her mother and father gave Watch food to eat, and she said she didn't think he got anything, and that was the way things were in those days. She would cry and cry, thinking about Watch and how his life was so sad at the end. She never forgot Watch. As one of my uncles told me on the phone once, Mary Ellen never forgot anyone. My mother was about 15 and her sister Sadie was about 14. They were both placed in live-in positions as assistant housekeepers and cooks, for example, for a local priest. And eventually my mother became a live-in general household and store assistant at the home and general store of Jeremiah Shields and his family. My mother read newspapers and was well aware of what was going on. She was aware of the Irish War of Independence from England. She knew to fear for her life from the Black and Tans. Normal people traveled with a horse and cart or a donkey, so she ran and hid if she heard a truck coming. In those days, that meant the Black and Tans riding around with guns drawn. She said one day A boy was walking along the road with his dog. Black and Tan shot the boy dead for no reason, and shot the dog dead too. She remembered her father voting Sinn Féin for Ireland's independence from England and for the Irish Republic in 1918. One day in 1930, when my mother was about 22, Rose, a sister of her father, who had emigrated years before to America and was settled as a live-in cook and housekeeper in the finest homes on the main line near Philadelphia. Aunt Rose sent my mother a letter and money to pay her passage to America. I asked my mother if she wasn't sad to leave her mother and father and sisters and brothers. She said that she was more than sad, but that she wanted to go to America to earn a decent salary so she could send money home to her family. And that was indeed what she did. But she never forgot anyone or anything in Donegal. She was just like Roddy McCorley in the great Irish song, "True to the last, true to the last." About a year or so before my mother left Ireland, her sister Sadie, aged 19 at that time, had left Ireland already to seek employment in Scotland. Sadie and my mother were brave girls. My mother, aged 22, sailed from lovely Derry on the banks of the Foyle in the month of May 1930 on the Caledonia, bound for New York. In an act of sheer brilliance, she had bought a camera to record her great voyage, and there were several Donegal people on board that she knew from home, all bound across the foam to the land of the stars and stripes to make their fortune in far America. My mother said they had a good crossing, with only one storm where all the dining hall tables and chairs were sliding around and crashing into the walls while the ship rolled violently from side to side. She said people at home had never talked about any passenger liner disasters like the Titanic, and she thought that was for the best. No point in terrorizing people. She was lucky to have her Aunt Rose meet her at the pier when she landed in New York. They traveled by train to Philadelphia's main line, where Rose worked as a live-in cook in a fine house in Ardmore. Within a day or two, Rose took her to a domestic service agency, and my mother was placed as a live-in cook and maid on Delancey Street in Philadelphia. Remember that my mother had only ever seen food cooked on an open fire, where there was no electricity, no indoor plumbing, no running water, etc., etc., etc. So different from what she found in Philadelphia. But my mother was a quick study, and as she always said, she took everything in her stride. She loved having a radio, the great entertainment in those days, to listen to while she worked. She was almost sorry when her day off came, because she had to miss her favorite radio show, Arnold Grimm's Daughter. It was a terrible shock for all concerned when the news finally came from Scotland that her sister Sadie, aged 20, had died in Scotland in childbirth in May 1930, the same month my mother left Ireland. Mrs. Shields, my mother's former employer in Donegal, wrote to my mother about Sadie. She was innocent indeed. It was hard on all of you, but especially your dear mother. My mother kept Sadie's holy card with photograph in her prayer book for the rest of her life. My mother persevered and did her best. Her Aunt Rose gave her the best guidance she knew how to give. Because servants were not allowed to stay home in their room on their day off, Rose introduced my mother to shopping in Philadelphia at the great department stores of those days. John Wanamaker's, Strawbridge and Clothier, Gimbel's and Litt Brothers, a great store in a great city, not to mention Woolworth's, and having lunch in Horn and Hardart's Automat. Aunt Rose took my mother to every party, wedding, and wake she could arrange to attend on their days off. Rose knew lots of Donegal people who had also emigrated to work on Philadelphia's main line as cooks, maids, child nurses, chauffeurs, and gardeners. Married couples were often hired as a team, cook and chauffeur or maid and gardener. Occasionally, their employers were kind enough to allow their servants to have a party and invite friends for the evening. We were still going to those estate parties in the kitchens and driveways when I was a child in the 1950s. Irish music and Irish dancing. I am very proud that my mother did not engage in any racial prejudice against African Americans, such as the laundress Lottie Barney, who came every Tuesday to do the laundry and ironing. My mother said Lottie could do up a man's starched shirt with perfect expertise, exactly the same as it would come from a first-class laundry. My mother had heard stories that some Irish cooks and maids would refuse to sit down at the same table to have lunch with an African American laundress. My mother always said, "How could I not sit down with Lottie Barney?" She said that she and Lottie were allowed to split a pound of ground beef for lunch, and that they always had a nice chat and enjoyed listening to the radio together. On a wonderful day off, my mother went with a friend to Atlantic City, which was the fun place in those days. You see my mother here looking absolutely beautiful and elegant in her pretty beach robe. She said her friend's robe was way too small for her, but she was happy to report they had a great time. In 1934, my mother had a date with destiny when her domestic service agency sent her for an interview, and she was hired as a live-in cook and maid for a wonderful couple who had raised 3 daughters, now all married and living elsewhere. Mr. and Mrs. Painter and my mother had a great meeting of compatible minds. They shared unassailable convictions and values of courtesy, decency, loyalty, and generosity of spirit. My mother worked for the Painters for 35 years, even after she married and had 2 children. Once when my mother needed to find a temporary live-in position while the Painters went on a 6-week vacation in Florida, Mrs. Painter wrote a valuable letter of recommendation for my mother. To whom it may concern, Mary Ellen Boyce is a very good cook and wonderful housekeeper, and I can vouch absolutely for her honesty. My father had a lot to say goodbye to when he sailed away from Derry to New York in 1927. There was no plan for anyone to meet my father at the pier. I often picture my father walking with his suitcase those many blocks along 34th Street in roaring 20s New York. But he found his way to Penn Station and took his very first train ride, reading New York newspapers about famous gangsters and Hollywood movie stars all the way to Philadelphia, where he transferred to the Paoli local train to travel on to Bryn Mawr, where Annie and her husband Phil Padden were waiting for him. In a matter of days he had found a job, driving a horse and wagon in West Philadelphia, carrying blocks of ice with a tongs into houses and walk-up apartments. I have no photograph of my father's father, who was a commercial fisherman who had a boat, and he and other men sailed out to catch fish, which they sold on Downing's Pier when they, hopefully, got back. My father said that men who went out commercial fishing purposely did not learn to swim. There were no weather forecasts, no radio communication systems in those days, and if a big storm blew up or other disaster struck, it was considered an easier death to drown quickly. There was no point or purpose in hopelessly trying to stay afloat when there was no possibility of anyone being able to find you in the horizon-to-horizon pitch darkness. If a boat was missing, people at home lit a big bonfire on a headland or put a light up on Downing's Pier, but it would have been impossible to get even close to safety. If a boat got into serious trouble, it went down, as my father said, with all hands. My father said their dog only spoke Irish. He said that if you said whatever you said to a dog, such as go in, go out, lie down, get up, in Irish, the dog well understood you and did as it was told. But if you said the same thing to the dog in English, the dog would just stand there, looking at you, cocking his head from side to side, as if he were saying, "What are you trying to say?" Before long, after arriving in America, my father was living in a boarding house in West Philadelphia, owned by two brothers who also came from Donegal, Paddy and Joe Coyle. You see the three of them here, looking very handsome and dashing in their new and finest clothes. I have always been sorry I never thought to ask my father for more information about Paddy and Joe Coyle, but it's too late now to ask. My father and my mother both arrived in America just in time for the Great Depression. One time during the Depression, my father was, despite his best efforts, out of work for several months. The Coyles kept him on, with room and board, until he found work again, and he paid back every cent to the Coyles. My father worked for a time as a live-in landscape gardener and maintenance man at the blind school in Overbrook, Pennsylvania. He also had a good job for several years as landscape gardener and maintenance man at Fitzgerald Mercy Hospital in Darby, Pennsylvania. But it was not all work and fear of unemployment. My mother and father had another date with destiny when they met in Philadelphia at a christening party in 1931. When I was growing up, my father occasionally told the story that after they met and talked that day, when my mother was leaving the party, he said she turned around to look back at him before going out the door. My mother always laughed and said, "Oh, I did not." All during the 1930s, they were a happy couple who went on dates to all the best places. Longwood Gardens, the Earl Theatre, the Donegal Ball, Irish music and Irish dancing. They became happy, dependable companions. In 1937, they went for the day to Atlantic City, as I said, the fun and glamorous place in those days, and had their portrait as a couple drawn in colored chalk on the boardwalk. My mother and father's courtship was interrupted one Sunday when my mother was getting the painter's Sunday dinner ready. It came over the radio that the Empire of Japan had, without warning, attacked the United States Navy at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and everything immediately changed. My father was drafted in early 1942 at the age of 40, and he was sent for basic training to Chattanooga, Tennessee. I read his induction letter where it spelled out that the penalty for not reporting for immediate enlistment included the death penalty. My father was extremely proud to serve in the United States Army and sent many photos of himself in uniform, sometimes with his rifle, to his girlfriend. He won a citation for marksmanship, and he was so proud that his commanding officer recorded that my father's character was excellent. When it was decided that the older men would not, in fact, be sent overseas as originally planned, my father was, after 6 months in Tennessee, sent back to Philadelphia, where he was required to work at the famous Baldwin Locomotives Factory, where they made locomotives that were sent to our World War II ally, the Soviet Union. After a happy reunion, my mother, aged 35, and my father, aged 41, were married after a 12-year courtship in May of 1943. I'm not going to say very much in words about our lives in our house. I'll just show you photographs. You'll be able to follow our story, I'm sure. My grandmother visited us and sang God Save Ireland in our kitchen. This is my best friend Ricky. Annie Patton sent us an Irish postcard and was kind enough to add, "Everyone was asking for you, Pat." In the good old summertime, my mother always dried her hair in the sunshine. We always went to the Devon Horse Show. Our next-door neighbor, Mrs. King, originally from Germany, was always a good friend to Ricky and me. She always made us roll on the floor laughing. Our other next-door neighbor, Mrs. Church, said she and her husband always danced in their living room to records, especially Mr. Church's favorite, Ray Charles singing, "I Can't Stop Loving You." In his 70s, my father began receiving a phone call at least once a year from a married woman in Scotland. Katie had been a little girl of 6 years when my father left Donegal in 1927. She was being raised by his family in their home in Derryhassan. She thought the world of Paddy McBride and never ever forgot him, even though it had been over 50 years since she had last seen him. Whenever I was around, everyone was game to shoot artistic photographs, including Lucky, a cat who was a good friend to all. My father often cried at certain Irish songs and music. I never see crying like this as weakness. It is the sign of an intelligent heart that knows what tragedy is. My father was always agreeable to my artistic photographs, even when he got pneumonia and died in the first week of May. My mother fell and broke her hip. She still always talked about her mother and father, who had died many years before. For many years she had kept up a written correspondence with her last surviving brother, John James. After the death of John James at 88, his son wrote to me that even though his father's memory was almost gone, he would still always ask, "Well, how is Mary Ellen?" even though it was almost 70 years since they had last seen each other. John James died on the evening of Christmas Day, and my mother died the following April. I asked my mother once if she was sorry that she had left Ireland. She said, "No, I wouldn't have missed this for the world." But we lived every day of it. Now you have heard our story, but my father would always say, "You don't know half of it." Last night as I lay dreaming on pleasant days gone by, my mind being bent on rambling, to Ireland I did fly. I stepped on board a vision, my voyage was underway, till at last we landed in Donegal, many miles from America. 3 of my cousins on my father's side, Joe, Paddy, and Mickey McBride, were ready to do their best to show me a good time around the beautiful historical countryside of northwest Donegal, and most importantly, to show me where my mother and my father came from. My cousin Joe was waiting for me at the famous Donegal airport at Carrickfinn. For a start, Joe drove us past Errigal, the tallest mountain in County Donegal. Joe is a quiet, reserved speaker of grace and intelligence. I saw that he was not comfortable being videotaped talking, so I did not in general shoot him while he talked with his great charm and storytelling talent. But I remember his stories, one of which was that his brothers had warned him when he was on a little trip to the north to, at all costs, avoid a certain bar, which coincidentally one day he was passing, and he thought, as we do, what's the harm? And he went in. He was the only customer in the front room, so he told the bartender that he would take his pint to the back room, hoping there would be more people there. There were 2 men and a woman sitting at a close-by table, when suddenly all 3 of them jumped up and murderously started punching the other man in the face and stomach. The man fell to the floor with a terrible crash, and the first man began savagely kicking him in the head and face, while the woman screamed, "Kick him, Mickey! Kick him!"
We're not violent in any way. We just thought it was a funny story.
My cousins Paddy and Joe took me to see Meva Churchyard Cemetery on the far side of the Rushgull Peninsula to visit the gravesite of our grandparents. The day was splendid. What a great day to be alive. My cousin Paddy could translate Irish inscriptions into English.
Tell you she was lost.
Here is the famous cross of St. Columba, carved out of stone by very determined people over 1,000 years ago. Here is the clip we saw earlier where Joe plays the part of the older boy who told my mother, when she was a child, that life was not everlasting and that we would all die one day. You will be surprised to learn that I am familiar with all the people listed here on this tombstone, and that my cousins and I are related to all of them. My cousin Paddy read the names to me. This is the tombstone of James McBride, our grandfather, a commercial fisherman who died in 1933, aged 67 years. Mary McBride, his wife, who died in 1962, aged 90 years, was our grandmother. Dennis McBride, who died in 1947, aged 87 years, was a brother of James McBride and also a commercial fisherman. John McBride, a carpenter by trade, who died in 1941, aged 40 years, was my father's older brother, who carried the mail before my father. My father told me that even though John had tuberculosis and was in no condition to walk 35 miles a day, carrying heavy bags of mail 6 days a week, he did exactly that for several years before my father, aged 15, took over from John, aged 17. I'm so sorry I have no photograph of any of these people except the photograph of my grandmother. I am very grateful to have that. I understand completely people who say religion is a fantasy. But the few minutes that some people achieve of belief in the hope of the help and kindness of God in moments of great fear and terrible sadness, surely there is no harm in that. Considering how people can suffer in this world, it is a great achievement. The creation of a few minutes of self-made safety, a few minutes or a few seconds of self-preservation. It helps us, like music helps us. What a beautiful place to be buried with such a beautiful view of the land and water. The cemetery is a wonderful reassurance for us, for when the day comes, when each of us will die, that it will be all right, because many people that we knew, or even knew of, have already gone on that voyage before us. As my mother said, her grandmother Sarah Dennison often said, "We cannot live always." My father always said when someone we knew died, well, they are away from all trouble and suffering now. Our gallant hero, Manus the Post. A gallant hero of the McBride family is our Uncle Manus McBride, Manus the Post, who carried the mail around Downings and the Rushgull Peninsula for 55 years, from the time he was 18 years old in 1927, when my father left Ireland to go to America, until when Manus was 72 years old. He retired from carrying the mail. I have been told by my cousins that Uncle Manus told them in 1986 that he wanted to go to America to see his older brother Paddy, my father, at least one last time. My cousin John was kind, skillful, and thoughtful enough to accompany Uncle Manus, who told me himself that he had first carried the mail walking, just like his two older brothers, John and Paddy, had done before him. He got a bicycle once, but said it was a terrible ordeal, much harder than walking, trying to pedal the bicycle up all the very long and steep winding hills with a heavy mail bag. And it was actually very dangerous to go careening down again those same winding long steep hills with the heavy bag. So one day he finally could afford a motorcycle, and that was really, as he said himself, the ticket. He drove the motorcycle for years with the mail, and my cousins told me he was so proud of that motorcycle. My cousin Patty told me that Uncle Manus was the most popular man on the Rascal Peninsula. He was, I am sure. My McBride cousins took me to see the daughter of my great-uncle, Mandy Dennison, who had died in 1943. He was my mother's uncle, the brother of her mother. To me he was a great charismatic family hero, a very handsome man, who took part in noble endeavors for the sake of the Irish Republic. To top it off, she said he was a wonderful singer. We went to see his daughter, Ellen Gallagher. She is a sparkling woman, a family heroine, a great lady.
What do they call your brother now? I knew him.
Peter.
He worked at Peter.
Yeah.
I remember him now when he was a young fella. He used to come up here.
Yeah.
He used to come up here. The young ones were running in around.
I'm shooting video. Don't worry. I always make everybody look very beautiful. You have nothing to fear. I'm not going to sell this to anybody or anything, you know.
Oh, sell it and just give the money to Ellen.
I am on top of the world, that I am so thrilled to meet you, and I understand that you're the daughter of Mandy Dennison. My mother used to say that Mandy Dennison was a wonderful singer. He could sing very well.
It was great meeting you.
Thank you, dear.
Yes, great meeting you after all these years.
Yes. It was such a happy adventure and a splendid revelation for me to meet for the first time my cousin Mickey. He is a man of great intellect with a heart of gold. I believe he made a great effort to realize what my camera and I needed, and he went ahead to generously provide that with tremendous pizzazz, in a blaze of talent, self-possession, and charm. He respects history. He is my movie star.
I was very friendly with Katie. And I took Katie over to Ards. She says, I want to go to Ards for confession, she says to me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
No problem, Katie, I'll take you over to Ards for confession. So over to Ards we went to confession. And we went in, and it was a lovely summer's day. And it says, ring the bell if you want confessions. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I rang the bell. We waited a while, and next thing this man came running in. Nothing on him but the togs and the football boots on him. And went in the box, you know. And Kitty took a while. She had a couple of steps going up. She was a very heavy woman to go get into the confession box. By the time Kitty was in the confession box, your man just walked out the door again. He says, I have a football match to referee. He says, can't wait, you know. So Kitty was in there for about 20 minutes, blethering away, and there was nobody there. And then Kitty came out and he says, we had confessions, Kitty. I was talking, but there was nobody answering, you know. So, what would you believe? Huh? Poor Kitty. She believed in all that. I could see the wee smile coming in her face and the wee teardrops coming down her eyes, and she was smiling away at me, you know, so happy. 3 weeks I was sent up every day to see her, you know. She had hair like you, long blonde hair, a real strong woman. She could lift 800 bags of coal with one hand. What a woman. You know. That's the kind of people I love. Right. That was an old clock that came from America.
It came from America?
Yes.
How did it get here?
That, Manus had.
1916?
Yes. There were so many Irish people joined up with the British Army.
Yeah.
They were recruiting them.
Yeah.
And all the young soldiers thought they were going away. There was a big propaganda in Ireland. Join the war and, be famous and all that. You'd get medals for it, But when they went to France, they found it different. At the Battle of the Somme, right? The English bombarded it for about 2 weeks, And they thought the Germans would be all dead. But the Germans built bunkers down and they were all alive. So when they went then to charge, they told them to run. And the more they ran, the more they were cut down by the Germans.
Yeah.
They lost an awful lot of people at the Battle of the Somme. Far too many.
From the north and also...
On the south. The Protestants and the Catholics fought together. And Gallipoli too, the British made a bad mistake as well. There was a fellow up here called Paddy Carr, and he was very nimble. And he had a corn down in the bottom of the foot,
Yeah.
So I took him up to this chiropodist.
Yeah.
And Paddy was he didn't like women at all. He was,
Uh-huh.
So this woman, she was a big, strong woman, And she told Paddy to put her foot up on a stool like this here,
Yeah.
And she was going to take the corn out, and Paddy was pulling his leg back like that all the time, you see. And the woman said, "Fuck you anyway," she says, That's the word. And you know what she done?
Right.
She had a big long skirt there, and she pulled the skirt up like that there.
Yeah.
And she sat down on Paddy's fucking knee like that. And she got a hold of it, and she pulled it out like that there. And the squeals of Paddy was like a big baby. About 6'4". And he was coming down the road and he says, "You wouldn't do that to a donkey," he says.
Mickey and I were not used to seeing photographs of our fathers, Ned and Paddy, as young men.
I don't know who these people are. That's not your father, is it?
No.
We would never make it as genealogists.
That is not my father. Let me see it again. That could be my father. Keep in mind, he was 44 when I was born. Do you think this is my father?
That's not him, no.
That's not him.
That's Neil McGinley, I think.
You know something? Maybe this is my father.
1916. That's all the ones that was shot, executed.
Patrick Pierce and Plunkett.
Two of the Pierces.
And yes.
Executed. There's Maud Gordon.
Oh, there's McBride.
Yeah.
John McBride. MacDonough and McBride. Wherever green is worn. Oh, it's Countess Markovitz.
Yeah.
Oh, God bless her soul.
She was the first lady to be elected in the British Parliament.
Yes.
Roger Casement.
Roger, my hero.
Sir Roger Casement.
He was a great hero. Also, he is considered the founder of...
modern human rights investigations.
He's the first one when he went to Africa to investigate the abuse of the Belgians were doing on the Africans. And he got translators there so he could talk to the Africans about how specifically they were being abused. And he did the same thing in South America.
Yeah.
So, how did you manage to get that newspaper?
They were selling it,
Yeah.
Italy. So I just bought it. There was a lot of women involved in that too,
Yeah.
They were the ones that done all the nursing, took them to the hospitals,
Yes.
and done all the running for them, and back and forth, and information, and all that,
Yes.
They were kind of couriers around Dublin, checking out where the British were and all that, Most of the Black and Tan, they terrorised fucking Cork. Cork was the main.
Oh, yeah.
Cork was a very, very...
I read all about the burning of Cork.
Terence McSweeney died of hunger.
Oh, God. I know. And when he was arrested, he said that he would be free in a month, whether they chose to release him or not, because he wasn't going to take any food. And from the time he was arrested until he died, he took no food, even though in the prison they brought in food to try to tempt him and put it beside where he was sitting or lying to tempt him, but he never gave in.
All the McSweeneys came from Donegal.
My 3 McBride cousins, including Paddy, nobly chauffeured me around from Hornhead to Donegal in Kilmacran and every place in between. Joe took me on the ferry to Buncrana. He drove me past where Lord Leitrim was assassinated while he was out delivering eviction notices.
Why did not somebody tell Mountbatten that his life was always going to be in danger living over there? Well, he was going to be a target. Probably the question is, why didn't somebody at some stage say to him, you are not safe there?
Yeah.
Because he wasn't. Like, he was representing the crown, basically.
Yeah.
You know, and like with the war going on,
Yeah.
it was inevitable that somebody was going to think of that.
Yeah.
You know, but that's what
Okay.
happened.
Yeah.
Shower, get a shower.
Cool down. Especially the dinner left. Oh, Lord, she took it back there. Yeah.
Look at this Jimmy.
Put that up. Come on there. Joe, come on there. Go back to that Joe show. Come on. Hi, lad. Hi, lad. Come on there. Does he not?
Look at that Jimmy.
Nice to meet you. Such a nice cousin.
No, my cousin. We're cousins.
Oh, lovely.
My father was his father's brother.
Oh, God bless you.
My father left Derry Hassan in 1927 to go to America.
Part of America. Philadelphia, I suppose.
My father went to Philadelphia,
Of course
yes.
he did.
Yes.
My grandfather left here in 1905
Oh, yeah?
from Priestland, came back in 1915. He went to Germantown, Philadelphia.
In Germantown. Philadelphia was very big.
But he came back, that's
Big
why
for the
I hear
Irish.
an Irish accent.
Philadelphia was called at that time the workshop of the world. It was all full of all kinds of manufacturers. Stetson hats, distant saw.
New York was not the big city.
Yeah.
It was Philadelphia.
Philadelphia was big.
1920s, yes.
And my mother left near Cranford.
Cranford, yeah. What's your name then? What's your family name?
McBride.
McBride, of course, from here.
Yeah.
You're McFattens.
Yeah.
Philadelphia's full of them.
Yeah. Sláinte war. Kajema Tatu, Tamiko Moikoro Moye.
Hey! Lisa, put your hands up! Lisa, put your hands up!
Yes.
Come on, we can make a deal. We can make some money.
Oh, you're the one making money now.
Come on, we can cooperate. We can cooperate and we can make some money.
No, you're an accomplice now. You're an accomplice.
Yes, this is your last chance. I give you 5 minutes.
5 minutes?
Yes.
I'll see you in 5 minutes then. I'll see you.
Outside. Head start.
I'll stay inside.
Suddenly, the whole bar went completely quiet. Someone had started playing Boule of Vogue about Father John Murphy and his men who fought and died for Ireland in the United Irishmen Rebellion of 1798. The boys of Wexford showed bookies regiments how men could fight.